So welcome. I mean, we've been chit-chatting a little bit, but it's nice to see your interest in this topic. We think it's a fantastic thing to explore just because it really helps organizations move beyond kind of words around this, but really gives you some nice guideposts of how to be more equitable or to in your organizational practices. So we think this is a great, we're happy that you're interested in this topic. We think it's a great topic. So to remind you, were you both here for the July session? Beth and Roxana, did you participate in that at all? No? Okay. That's okay. So
That's good.
yeah, that's good. We're going to be using this framework for today's work and the work that we have planned for this group moving forward. It comes from an organization named Praxis. You may be familiar with them. And they've done kind of the heavy lifting around how do you articulate what those values should be, and then how do you operationalize them. They've done that work with their framework, which we like. So we're going to be playing with this and moving through it together. And this was shared in July. There was a convening in July where people came together and played with this framework and had an opportunity to understand the constructs and react to them. So there was such great interest there that we decided to continue on that path, which is where today came from.
Mhm. And we've been on quite a journey when we've been working with the Healthy Connections portfolio on metrics. We started earlier in the year when we got to earlier in the grant year, I would say, we got to know more about what the group of folks who are being funded under the Healthy Connections are doing and up to. And so we first tested out this concept of civic and community engagement with a work group, and said, is this something that can span across all of our work together? The answer is yes, but the metrics part seemed harder to wrap our heads around because of the diversity of work that we were doing together. We're all actively civically minded on various different topics. And so, and that's great. And there's no problem with that. And so then we got, well, perhaps everybody's working a bit on leadership. Maybe leadership is something that we can explore together. So I know we were doing, when we were doing the midpoint evaluation, we asked you about transformational leadership. And though, again, there's a lot of synergy around that work, it was, again, a little bit mystifying in terms of could we have a shared metric come from that? And so when we, in July, started talking about organizational equity practices, that's where it felt like we met the sweet spot that came together, where there was a lot of synergy. I suspect that some of that comes from the fact that a lot of you who engage with us at this level are kind of in management positions, and you're thinking a lot about how does my organization operate and what does my organization do? And so it's less about programmatic work, although programmatic folks are in the mix and your programs are in the mix, but it's more of like, how does our organization live its values? And that seemed to be something important for us to turn our heads to. So I'll stop there and say, Iman, welcome. Welcome. We just got started a few minutes ago. We're still
Sorry,
late.
I'm a little late. I usually do carpool at this time, but I was like, I have to attend this meeting.
No
So I
worries.
tried my best to make it in on time.
Oh, no worries.
No worries, no worries.
We're just getting warmed up. No worries. So we do want to flag for you that this area of organizational equity practices is it's a vast area. There's multiple approaches and multiple tools. And this is just an example of a resource that we will provide to you. We're going to try to curate it a bit more so it makes it's easier to use, but there are multiple ways that you can operationalize these concepts in your work. So we've decided to pursue this particular framework because, as Jennifer said, it resonated, and it seems there was something about it that folks liked, but there's other ways to do this as well that we'll share with you at the end of our journey together. We felt it was important to point out a key assumption of the praxis framework that we did that we will be using, because we've heard a lot, and rightfully so, about staff care burnout, from lots of different EDs and lots of different staff and organizations. This particular framework really focuses more heavily on community care. So it's really thinking about what actions help our organization care for the community. And we'll get into the ways in which this tool articulated that, but it's less about, there's a couple of items in this about your staff, but really we just want to have you note that this is more leaning more towards the community care end of the continuum. It's just sort of the way this tool has evolved. There are other tools that get more into staff care issues of burnout. You won't see a lot of that in this particular tool.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing I'd add there is that we recognize that for many organizations, they see their organization as an extension of the community. So there isn't quite as stark of a dichotomy, I guess, between these two things. And I think that that's okay. I think the tool can accommodate for that. And then we also recognize that, that some people's mind is about being a good employer. What does that look like, especially in times of stress and lots of things that we have to do. And again, we think that the tool will accommodate for that as well. But that's the whole purpose of the pilot, which is to see, is this tool the right one for us? Or we'll also provide other tools for you to peruse later in the process. So you could say, actually, this other one might be more aligned with our thinking about the work.
Mm-hmm. So we thought we'd spend a few moments just kind of outlining our thinking about the purpose of this pilot, just to see if it resonates and just so everybody's on the same page. See the aims as being defining these practices. Like there's a lot of language used about equity, but we're really just looking to see if we can get more specific on what those practices might be that reinforce equity. We would love to pilot this process where we have an organizational team assess itself and then have a peer organization provide feedback on their self-assessment. That's an kind of a innovation that we brought to the Praxis tool. That's not originally how it was designed, but we think there's a lot of value in hearing from your peer organizations versus people like us that may not be as close to the work giving feedback. So we think that might be a value add here as we go through this. So again, piloting the tool and the process is part of what we're hoping to do. And then really, we would love to hear your recommendations on this pilot, this tool and this process. If you were like, that was ridiculous, I hate it, good to know, then we can try something else. But and we would love to hear from you your recommendations for future use of this tool and process. Welcome, Dash.
Hello, hi.
Hi.
Hello.
So here's a very high level view of what we have planned for you and what we're thinking in terms of activities. This is obviously today we're getting warmed up. We're going to orient you on what the tool is and how to use it. We're going to have you look at the tool and play with it a little bit this afternoon to give us some early feedback on the items in there. And then in January, if you have changes to it, of course, we can make changes. And then in January, we're hoping that you can assemble a team inside your organization and go through the tool as a team, and we'll give you more guidance on who we think would be a good team member for that process. And then in February, we'll do a bit of work so you'll submit that to us. We'll do a bit of work redacting. We want this to be an anonymous process so people don't feel sort of, uncomfortable in any way. So and then we would send you a peer organization's responses for that peer review process. Like you may have some really good ideas for that organization on how to reinforce something that you see in their responses. And then we'll come together one more time in March. Before this meeting, you'll get your full packet of your feedback and your peer feedback. And then we'll gather one more time to just debrief on the process. What did you like about it? What was hard? Did things take too long? Was this total, like I said before, waste of time? We would love to hear from you in March when we're done with all these activities. So let me pause there. Are there any early questions before we kind of dive in and start playing with this tool? Any immediate reactions or thoughts that anybody wants to share? Does this feel clear so far? Okay, great. So here's the tool. I think, Iman, were you at the meeting where we played with this? And Dash, were you at the July gathering where we introduced this framework? It's okay if you weren't.
I think it was introduced. I don't think we
didn't look
were
at the tool, just the concepts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Dash, does this look at all familiar to you?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
it is familiar. Yeah, last time we discussed on this.
Okay, wonderful. So this particular tool has 5 major domains that it uses that the developers felt really embody practices that support health, justice, and health and racial equity. So we're going to walk through each of these buckets, and we're going to show you the actual practices, or just a very high level statement about the actual practices that you would be answering for your organization. So as we go through it, just start thinking about how you might answer this or how you might think about it in the context of your organization.
So we have what we're calling the kind of top level, the Act with Care. We'll probably refer to them as domains. You'll hear that every once in a while. And then under each domain, there are practices. And there's a total of 12 practices that go across the 5 domains. And so each domain has 2 or 3 practices that it highlights. Sometimes the practices are aligned with what we talked about earlier about community care, and sometimes they're aligned with staff care. And so we flagged the community care ones in orange and the staff care ones in green. So you'll see that. And if for some reason it's off to you or whatever, we would encourage feedback at that level as well. So here we are under the first domain, Act with Care, although really there's no sequence. And there are 2 practices here. One that's about building relationship and trust with community partners, and ones that are about addressing biases and stigmatized statuses as well. And so those, are high level concepts. And so when we get further into the tool, we have a way to maybe operationalize these things further. So when we ask you, does your organization attend to these things? You can kind of tell us your more deeper thoughts on them with some by answering some questions.
Mm-hmm. And we've tried to, so we'll move to the next one. I just want to flag for you that these big boxes are really kind of the original language from the Praxis folks. We wanted to hold on to that so you can see when we were going through this process, we were thinking, does that really get at inclusivity? But this is the way that this was their intent, like this is what they're trying to get at. And these items are their best guesses of how to get there. So the next domain is inclusivity. And here it's really about engaging, including people that are most impacted by those inequities to make sense of the problem, pick solutions, and define what success means. So in here we have 2 practices that the members of impacted communities are leading decision-making processes, and that the members are represented at all levels of the organization. And you'll notice that we've tagged this one as staff care. You'll see when you get into the tool that it references retention, and it just made us think of being a good employer, having an environment where people want to stay. I'm assuming that those folks are from the communities that you serve. So we thought that felt more like a staff care item. So we have 2 under inclusivity.
Under authentic community engagement, we have 3 practices here, which is a little bit bigger. The domain has it about dignity and honoring perspectives, and then this co-creation idea that we're working together around the work that we do. And so practice 5 is about valuing lived experiences. You know, we're evaluators, so sometimes people are like, well, where are the numbers? And we're like, lived experiences is data too and matters. So is there ways that comes through in your work? Practice 6 is about transparency and communication with partners. How involved are they? Or how involved are all of us who are working on this in some of the decision making that's happening? And then barriers to participation. You know, if there is this co-creation, co-designing, co-working on things, how have you removed barriers so that people can come to the table and participate?
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to note with these types of processes that they're ongoing. So I would never expect that an organization hits all of these at the highest level. Like we work with partners that are really good at number 7. Like they'll have the gift cards and the childcare and the transportation, but they may not involve people in key strategic decisions. So that there's no all good or all bad. It's just these are just milestones. If you want to optimize one of these are areas where you can push to get there. But we fully expect that people would be all over the place depending on the practice. That doesn't mean they're not a good organization or that they don't care about equity. It just means this is where we're at right now, and it gives us a sense of where we can grow. So the next one is sustainable solutions. So a lot about building community capacity, which could look like building resident or other participant knowledge, working on those relationships, deepening those, increasing programmatic capacity. So infrastructure, both in terms of human beings and also in the way that you deliver your services. So here there are 2 practices, a question about whether your solutions are really upstream. Are the solutions that you're using trying to stem the problem from where it originates, or is it just kind of responding to the problem? Again, not a judgment on either, but it's asking us to think about like, where are we on that downstream, upstream public health continuum? And then the second is about building the community's infrastructure. So am I building leaders? Am I bringing, what other examples? Am I like creating resources in the community that will exist beyond me? Or am I just solely in service delivery? So it'll ask you to think about that. Sorry if you can hear my kid making weird noises.
And then finally, we have this commitment to transformation, which also has 3 practices, which has to do with, it's kind of, in my mind, a bit of a catch-all in a way, where it's like wrapping it up. Transformation can be at many different levels. And so one of the practices is, do we practice a peer feedback and self-reflection process? Hence, this tool can help with that. And then we also have this, like, how do we hear from the impacted community? Even if there's staff, that can be great too, but how do we make sure that we're hearing from maybe like all corners of our community and getting feedback as we try to do community engagement across the spectrum? And then how do we use the feedback that we receive to actually make changes to our work? And so again, this tool can help with that. But where else are these practices being exercised within your everyday organizational practice?
Mm-hmm. And that brings us to the end. So we're looking at 12 practices. The original Praxis tool has many more, but we went through a conversation as a team and tried to curate it a little bit more, just in the interest of usability. So we've landed on these 12. So at this point, I'll just pause and say, are there any questions at all yet? Just want to be mindful of that. Sometimes, no, good. Okay. So now what we'd like to do is actually, let me back up. We're going to show the example, right? me,
We were just going to go over to the tool for a moment.
let's actually show you the tool. So were people able to get the PDF that we sent in advance? Okay. So let's just jump in the tool here so we can highlight a few things for you here.
And does anyone not have it? Do we need to upload it into the chat?
I'm not seeing any cries for help.
Okay.
So this is the tool that we created for you, and it's a fillable PDF. So we're hoping that it helps with the usability. And we have some language in here. We'll talk about this in a bit. We don't need to necessarily spend time on it, but we have language in here about that team that I referenced earlier. We flagged that there's different kinds of areas of focus in here, and then we have the actual tool. And then we have an example, which is we want to start previewing the tool for you and what to expect in there. So this is a made up example. We literally just, Jennifer and I just made up responses of things we might say, but for each practice, we're going to ask you to give a quantitative and a qualitative response. So the first thing you'll answer is just best guess on this particular practice. Where would you say your organization is? This doesn't occur to you at all yet at this point? You're starting to think about it and make progress. You've thought about it, you're doing things, maybe you're not doing everything yet, but you're on your way. So you're making good progress. And then fully in place, like, yep, we've completely optimized this, and we feel very comfortable with the way we embody this particular practice. So part of what we're hoping this tool will do is provoke conversation in your own analysis. Like this, there's no right answer. It's not like we're going to come in and say incorrect. So this is just really meant as a thinking tool. Like, are we really all the way there here? And your team is the one that's going to know fully all the things happening in your organization, and the examples will come from that team, and that shared view of the organization will come from that team. So this is not precision science. We're just asking, where do you all think you're at right now? And then, so that is how, actually, that's not even how Praxis does it, but that's the first level of analysis, is where do you think you are?
Mm-hmm. And then we have these qualitative openings for you to tell us a little bit more about this practice in action. And so we want to hear, some of you might have kind of a theoretical framework or even just values that we bring to practicing that practice. So here we said we aim to be a consistent presence in our community, warm and welcoming and responsive. That's kind of our philosophy about building trust. And what's the other? Building trust. And if you scroll up a little bit, and building relationships. So that's kind of what we bring to the table. And so here's an example of, we might have, regular meetings and we have, since we want to be warm and welcoming, we want food. We provide, all the access to the things, transportation, childcare, that sort of thing. It's not meant to be an example necessarily of the kinds of things we're looking for, but we wanted to say, well, you don't have to write a tome, to tell us about this principle in action. We just give us a little bit about your philosophy, maybe an example, and then how do you know the practice is working? Maybe you're like, yep, this is good. We keep doing it because we think it works, because in this specific situation, people continue to come and request for support. We think we're connecting at least with a segment of our community regularly and meaningfully. And then if you have a thought about your growing edge, or what, where you want to grow deeper, we know, because we've been present with you for a while now, many of you are thinking about, what about the folks that don't come to our events, or there's segments of our community that still feel a little disconnected. How can we, build bridges there and remove barriers to engagement and participation and that sort of thing? And so it's good to have growing edge, to be like, what else? Because this is a lifelong journey that we're on. It's not, I doubt all of us are going to be fully grown at any particular point in time, because our lives tend to evolve and our communities evolve, and so we have to keep our finger on the pulse of that evolution.
Mhm.
So this is really just meant to be just more about this amount of information that we're looking for. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have to be everything that you do in a particular practice, but just to give us and you and whoever might be your peer feedback folks a little idea of how you approach this principle
Mhm.
in practice.
And so as you
Mhm.
go
Go, you
through
go. You.
okay, as you go through it, you will, these are fillable, so you'll say, I think we're here, and then you'll do some thinking on your own about, this is why we do it this way. Here's just one simple example. How do I know this is working? Like, it could just be people are telling you, I love this space, I love being here. And then where's your growing edge, which I suspect for this crew will be easy. Like, you always have ideas on what you would do if you had that next grant or that next infusion of cash or relationship. I think it'll be easy for you to think about what you'd want to do next. So as you go through this for each of these, it's the same rhythm, rating, and then just some thinking about, like, okay, unpacking this a little bit. And I can imagine, like, in public health, we love assessments. I can imagine you'd go through a process maybe once a year or once a quarter, where you have this, you go deep using the tool, and this could serve as like a roadmap for what you might want to work on next year, or where you want to grow. So that's how we've structured this. Any questions, reactions yet? Still feeling pretty clear? Okay. So I think what we want to do next then is we would love for you to spend some time on the tool with a partner. So you'll be in a breakout room with one other person. We're going to put you in a room with one of these domains. And we would love for you to take a hand at 2 or 3 practices in that domain. So you'll notice a lot of them have 2 practices, a couple have 3. We're going to give you a chunk of time to do this together. We don't need you to bring back your responses for these narrative questions, but we will ask you to give us some feedback on the process itself. And I should show you where that will be contained in it's in your PDF. So let me.
The last page of your PDF.
The last page of your PDF, that's right. So at the very end, we have these reflection questions. These won't be in the tool normally, it's just for today, where we ask you to just give us a sense of time. We don't know how long this will take. Did you like it? Was it easy? Did you get stuck? Did you not understand the wording? Do you have suggestions for better wording? And then give us a signal on, is this a practice that's like relevant to the work that you do? Is this a useful one to check in on as an organization? Give us a sense of how useful that particular practice was. What else am I forgetting, Jennifer?
That's it.
So everybody know what we're asking you to do? Do you have, and everybody has the PDF, I feel like?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Beth,
So we
I
have,
love your bookshelf. I'm like obsessed with books. It's a problem actually, but your display is like, they're just everywhere.
Thank you. Yeah, there are also stacks on the table over here. It's a bit of an issue, but thank you.
I love that. Makes me happy. So any questions before I
let me, I was just going to just ask a one. So we have 4 organizations and Claire. Claire, would you like to participate with the group today?
Sure.
So basically we'll have two groups. And so what's your recommendation then, Tahoot, since there are 5 areas?
Yeah. Do we want to do Act with Care and Authentic Community Collaboration as one group, and then Inclusivity and Commitment to Transformation as the other? Is that what you're thinking, Jennifer?
Yes.
Okay.
That sounds right.
Okay, so because ignore what the breakout name says, because we're not using that structure. So whoever goes with Claire will have commitment to Claire, you be the one to remember commitment to transformation and inclusivity. And then whoever goes with Beth, you'll have, is that right? Act with Care and Authentic community collaboration. So Beth, if you could hold on to that, that would be great.
And so that means each group has 5 practices that they're going to be looking at in this 30-ish minute period.
Actually, one group will have 3 people.
Yes, there'll be 3 people, but I was just talking about there's a total of 5 practices
Yes.
for each group.
So do we just, because we're from all different work, do we just like pick one organization and kind of go from that viewpoint as we fill it out?
You can decide to do it however you'd like.
Okie dokie.
You could.
You all might have different vantage points.
Yeah. One way would be to do it for your home organization, see how it feels, because we're less interested in your responses. We're more interested in the tool,
The process.
the
Okay.
process. So you could
Okay.
just do the work for your organization, and then as a group, talk about, was that practice easy? Was it use the reflection questions, maybe to debrief on the actual use of the tool? Does that make sense?
So we
Okay.
should do it independently and then come together in our breakout room to discuss how it was. Is that your recommendation?
That's a way you could do it.
It's a way to do it. I think what I was imagining is you'd all look at the practices and principles, and we say, like, Beth, you might say, well, this is how I would just off the cuff answer this, recognizing there's more massaging when I get maybe with other people at my organization, but here's how I would approach it. And then maybe who's ever with you would be like, I wouldn't have any idea how to approach, and that's okay. And then that's okay. And we're like, oh, is it the wording then? Or so I think we're just looking at it kind of more off the cuff. But if you wanted to take 10 minutes in the beginning or 5 minutes in the beginning to have everybody fill in their own answers so that when you start talking about it as a group, that's another way to do it. So it's kind of up to you for how you feel would be best to digest this. I'm an off the cuff person. Tahoot's more of a I need time to think person. So you might have to go with whatever the learning styles of the people who show up are.
Okay, I'm gonna open the rooms. So we have a set of questions to go through with you, but if you have immediate thoughts that you would love to share on the overall experience, feel free to.
I will share that Roxana and I had a great conversation about, we did it together, which was not efficient, and yet it was really good. I mean, we learned a lot about each other's work, and she helped me see some things that we were doing that I wasn't seeing, which was really helpful. But also we didn't get as far as we were supposed to.
Sounded like you're having a good conversation. How far did you get?
We got through about 1.25 of the
Of the 2 print.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Of the things, yeah.
And I learned that they had included kindness as a value, and I love it.
Oh,
I'm going to
wonderful.
take it to my board.
Nice.
I know, I absolutely love that one.
That is a good one. How about the other group? Any overall reactions before?
I really did like how it's like a self-assessment. I think a lot of the not issues per se, but like feedback that we had about it were kind of little small changes in like wording and like bolded words was something Claire and I talked about. But I mean, overall, I did like how it allows you to take a look into your organization, but not just that, but at your community level and at the large scale impacts of it, as well as like smaller scale impacts of it. And I really did like that kind of dynamic.
Nice. Well, we'll take all the wording and bolding and all of that too. I don't know if you noted them anywhere.
Yes, I did.
Sent to us, but we would absolutely love that. How about you, Dash? You were in the room with Claire, right? You were in Claire's room?
Yes. Yeah, most of the Eman gave a wonderful contribution in the group actually. So yeah, so I agreed whatever he says. So Jim and Seva also doing same kind of work and wording and scaling. So same thing we are following.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Good. So Beth, you had said something about efficiency, and one of the questions we had was about time, but I'm not going to ask about time. I'm going to ask a little bit differently. Do you feel, was that inefficiency more because you were trying to get to know each other's organizations? Would it move faster if you're talking to your own team, where obviously everybody knows what's happening inside? Would that dynamic make a difference in the efficiency piece that you mentioned, you think?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because we were kind of doing we were doing a parallel process. So we were each talking about our own organizations. Yes, I think it was I am really looking forward to having these conversations with our team. I think it's going to be enlightening, and I think it will. I can already tell. I mean, Roxana, we just did a strategic planning process, and I was just like, oh my gosh, we missed a huge opportunity to include community feedback when we did that. So I can already tell it's going to make a difference in the way we do our work, regardless of whether it winds up being the final tool or not. Sometimes the process is the product, and I think that this is one of those times.
100%. That's how we're thinking about it too. It's more about the process. It's less about the scores and all of that. It's more about what it provokes. So, what was hard about this process or this? I know we didn't give you much time. These are heady concepts that you have to sort of chew on. You would be doing that with your team. But what was hard about it, if anything, from what you could tell today? Where might you get stuck?
I definitely think this is something that will take a lot of time to kind of go through as an organization. I think I know the other team mentioned that they weren't able to get through it all. And I think the only reason why our team was able to get through it all was because Claire was familiar with both organizations. So it was very easy to kind of go through it because she kind of helped moderate the conversation and like she knows about both organizations, the ins and outs from a community level to a staff level. And so that's what made it easier. So I do agree with Beth when she mentioned that totally will be transformative when you're doing it with your own organization rather than with other orgs. Because it definitely is. These are conversations that I do see them happening when we do have like our weekly team meetings. They just aren't like structured in this type of setup, but they are brought up from time and time again during these like weekly staff meetings we have. They're just not in a structured sense. And so setting aside time to take a look through this and actually sit there and like answer the questions and go through it as an organization, what works, what doesn't, definitely will be more transformative.
Wonderful. Yeah, I can definitely see how you can move faster when you're having the conversation inside with your team. I've heard some ideas for use or how you might do it. So I've heard strategic planning, like in our minds, this would be something you do once a year to take a pulse on where you're at, and not something that you would do all the time unless you wanted to. But how are folks thinking about how they might use this and in what ways?
I do think that the yearly thing will be helpful, but one cool aspect of this tool that I really did like was the last question, how do you want to grow this practice moving forward? It is a future it's a question that looks into the future and like helps you plan for the next year, next 2 years or 5 years. And so I think if organizations utilize this tool and then like if they do it annually, their question for the next year should be that last question and kind of see what the placeholder looks like. Where are we at on the timeline of this? If we were able to achieve it, what can we do? It brings more questions onto these questions by just looking back at that last question each year and like how can we modify it? What changes do we need to make as an organization? Why weren't we able to get to where we wanted to grow? And like what can we do for the next year to make sure that we are able to grow in this capacity?
Well, and then that ties to one of the other observations that Mom made in this group is that, that last reflective question, right, isn't like, so what did you guys not do, or what did you screw up on? It's positive focus and it goes forward. And it also helps to shape that the work is developmental. It's developmental with the staff, it's developmental depending on what's going on in the bigger context. And then a mom, so this is like in sign language, like, oh my God, she had this great idea, like the light went on. And she was like, we should put that developmental statement up front too. That this, like every developmental stages has opportunities and challenges, but it's not a bad developmental stage, and so I really appreciate it. So we kind of end on that, sort of reminding people like, this is developmental and what are the next steps you want to take? But she was saying, how do we ground people in that developmental framework from the beginning? So as they're going through the tool, they're not like, ah, crap, I'm not doing that. Oh man, I forgot to do that, So I really love that observation, Mom.
Absolutely.
I have a question. I think the presentation of the tool is one of the most positive that I have seen in describing communities, but still, depending on who's your audience, right? So if I bring it to my staff and I bring it to my advisory councils and I go, oh, you are the impacted community, it still has that otherness, that us versus them. So it depends on the audience. And again, very positive, but still impacted. So I wouldn't use that. And I know sometimes you just have to say the things as they are to people that may not be familiar with. But okay, you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean, and we can change this. I think you're right that's language that isn't the most open-hearted. I mean, the intent is good, but it doesn't convey how you think about your community partners and your, So yeah, so you flag that for us, we can go back and change that language. Is there? Let's move into wording, and I love, Iman, your suggestion. It reminded me of our work with schools using this other tool, and we always have to sort of assure them on the front end that this is not a test. So we can absolutely add that. What other wording language things did you all flag?
I think for us, we talked about if there would be more options available with the multiple choice. There might be like a middle ground between fully in place and making good progress, and then like a middle ground between like not at all and like starting to make progress. Because before organizations tend to start to make progress, they do a lot of like soul searching or just like questioning a lot of things, and I think that should be like in there, like starting conversations, because conversations isn't really progress in the aspect that I would think about it. I would think starting to make progress would be like, okay, we contracted a consultant, we're starting to do something in this field. But I think there's a step before that. So I think if there was like a few more added options in there, it would be helpful. Another thing that we also kind of picked up on was for the commitment to transformation. And I'm not sure if this also exists on different questions, but we noticed that all of the questions had like bolded words in them. And I felt like that helped tie in a theme, but there were the last two practices and commitment to transformation didn't have that.
Right.
And so I noticed that and I was like, what is the theme per se in those practices? And I think it would have been helpful to have some sort of bolded statement in there to help like tie into what that theme is for the certain practice. That would have definitely been helpful.
Absolutely, we can do that. That was just Tahoot being herself, forgetting things. So we'll fix that. Thank you.
Well, we also were wondering about like how people are interpreting the questions, like the one on practice 11 around accessible channels. We were talking, that some people might think like, oh, think social media, think virtual, but there's also accessible meaning language, or I don't have a computer, so I can't interact with that, or I live in greater Minnesota and I don't have reliable internet. And so that was an example where you're kind of like, huh, as people do this, they're owning it themselves. But as all the data comes in, like across the groups, if we're ever going to look at that, people, my just getting started might be somebody else's, I've got it made in the shades because of our perspective and where we sit too on that up the top like 4 or 5 like developmental stages. And the other thing we talked about is what's the frequency and the duration. You know, it's like I read this article by Resma. I'm done for this year, you know. And so we also were like, like some people might be kind of like easy graders on themselves, and other people are like, oh no, I should have done more. And so, and then the other thing was because some of the principals are really sort of community externally facing, and some of them are staff, you know, having a conversation, rating themselves. That depending on the dynamics of the staff and what's going on, you know, lots of people quitting, or, you know, a new executive director coming in, or like with Sewa switching from a founding director to 2 co-directors, then depending on when you're taking the tool and what's going on, the community facing ones might be harder, but depending what's going on, some of the inward facing ones might be harder too. And so in like, how do we help people? Is there any advice that we can provide or guidance? Because we never know what's going to be going on when anybody's using the assessment tool.
Like a resource along with maybe the report with ideas for next steps. If you're interested in this particular one, here's some ideas to get you started, kind of thing.
Oh, that would be helpful. Like having a set of like what this looks like. Or
what this could look like, yeah. Something like that, maybe.
Because I think a lot of these questions do have a more like broad, like open-ended type of statement, which does have its impact, because then that means like that also helps you evaluate how organizations are interpreting certain things. And I think that there is an evaluation piece in that within itself, but that all depends on like how, so say for example, like you had a vision on how you want organizations to answer specific questions, but they interpret it in a completely different way. And so now you guys have to also reevaluate how you're evaluating this piece. And so I think there is room for like changing a few words to kind of create a more structure to them where they have a specific to them while still keeping it at a larger vision.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think it's probably gonna, so it's probably not gonna, in my mind at this point, a big evaluation tool for us to judge any kind of thing. It's really more, at most I can see us, if it like, let's say rolls out across the whole foundation's portfolio, that we would just say, hey, it's going to be voluntary. No one has to do it, but we might tell, you know, might say like 12 out of the 70 organizations did this process, and here's some of the things they learned at most, you know what I mean? So we're not going to be like, these guys are at 70%, these guys are at 20, this is a problem. It's not really meant to be that kind of tool, I guess.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's really for the organization.
I wonder if, to Claire's point, it might be helpful to have a little more guidance around who should be on your team. Yes. So, I mean, you'll say this better, but making sure that you have a combination of easy graders and self-flagellators so that there's some balance there. Just encouraging some thoughtfulness about who we bring to the table. And then by way of answering a previous question, which is related, I had, just as we were going through it, envisioned perhaps bringing this to our weekly staff meeting over the course of 5 weeks and addressing one modality each week as part of I think it could be a really good team building opportunity as well. Although it would be great to get board impact too. So maybe we do like a mini retreat with some board members and do it in 2 different places rather than trying to just do it once, or I don't know. I'm imagining different ways that this could be useful and generative for our organization.
Well, and I'm so glad you brought that up, Beth, because in the principles or whatever that we were doing, we had the one that was like, and there's representation on a staff focusing one of the frontline staff and the management staff and the board, like at all levels of the organization. And I was like, what if I was doing it with my team and I get to that question? It's like, oh crap, I don't have that representation even on this little review team, So I think, yeah, generating ideas and opportunities for people to figure out, what makes for a right size team, and perspectives, ages, tenure, where you are placed. But I also really love your piece about spreading it out over time, because I think then people might become more trusting as they go for, or they could start making connections like, hey, we did that, and I wonder if this is connected to this, which can kind of support that developmental growth kind of opportunity message.
Yeah, I mean, again, a process as product kind of thing. It ensures that as an organization, we are making sure that we're talking about racial equity on a regular basis. And maybe it's an every staff meeting we do a thing that's related to evaluating ourselves or future planning. I think that we think of ourselves as pretty good in this space, but we're not actively working on it. And this could be a way to actively work on it.
I love the ideas.